The lightning split the Wyoming sky like a jagged wound, and Ethan Porter knew he was racing against more than just the storm. His horse labored beneath him as rain began to fall in sheets so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. But something had caught his attention in that last flash of light, something that looked wrong out here in the open prairie, 5 miles west of Evanston. He urged his gelding forward, squinting against the downpour, and that was when he saw them both. A heavily pregnant mare struggling against her lead rope tied to a broken wagon wheel, and huddled beneath that same ruined wagon, a woman with terror in her eyes and a belly swollen with child. Ethan was 26 years old and had seen his share of desperate situations in his years working cattle drives and managing his small ranch. But this tableau struck him differently. The woman could not have been much older than 20, maybe 22, her dress soaked through and torn at the hem, her dark hair plastered to a face that might have been pretty if it were not twisted with pain and fear. She clutched her stomach with both hands, and even through the roar of the storm, he could hear her labored breathing. "Madam," he shouted, dismounting quickly and approaching with his hands visible, knowing she would be frightened of a stranger. "I've got a barn 3 miles north." "You cannot stay out here." She shook her head violently, pressing herself back against the wagon wheel. "The baby," she gasped, and he saw her whole body tense with what could only be a contraction. "It is coming. I cannot ride." Ethan looked at the mare, then back at the woman, his mind working quickly through impossible options. The storm was getting worse, the kind that could bring hail the size of chicken eggs and wind strong enough to lift a man off his feet. They had maybe 15 minutes before conditions became truly deadly. He made his decision in an instant, the kind of split-second judgment that separated survivors from victims in this unforgiving country. "What is your name?" he asked, moving closer and kneeling beside her despite the mud. "Theresa Vance," she said through gritted teeth. "Miss Vance, I am Ethan Porter, and I swear on my mother's grave I will get you to shelter, but you have to trust me right now. Can you do that?" She looked into his eyes, and whatever she saw there must have convinced her because she nodded. He did not waste time with more words. He untied the mare first, knowing the animal would follow his gelding if given the chance. Then he lifted Theresa as gently as he could. She was lighter than he expected, clearly underfed, and that fact made something protective surge in his chest. He got her situated on his horse, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm firmly around her waist to hold her steady. The ride back to his ranch was the longest 3 miles of Ethan's life. Theresa cried out several times, her body going rigid against his, and he found himself murmuring reassurances he had learned from helping his mother through difficult times before she passed. The pregnant mare followed gamely, her survival instinct overriding whatever exhaustion she felt. The rain was relentless, turning the prairie into a quagmire, but Ethan knew every inch of this land. He had bought the property 4 years ago with money saved from a decade of hard work, and he had walked its boundaries in every season and weather. When the dark shape of his barn finally appeared through the deluge, relief flooded through him so powerfully he almost laughed. He dismounted first, then carefully lifted Theresa down, supporting her weight as they stumbled through the barn door. The sudden absence of rain felt like a blessing. His 2 horses and 3 milk cows shifted in their stalls, disturbed by the commotion but not panicked. He led both horses inside, leaving them near the entrance where he could tend them later, then focused entirely on Theresa. "The house is another 50 yards, he said, "but I do not think we should risk it. Can you tell me how far apart the pains are coming?" "Close," she whispered, her face pale in the dim light filtering through the barn's high windows. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Ethan felt his pulse quicken but forced himself to remain calm. He had helped birth calves and foals, had even assisted when his neighbor's wife went into labor 2 years back before the doctor arrived. But this felt different. This was his responsibility alone, in the middle of a storm that showed no signs of letting up. He guided Theresa to the back of the barn where he kept his supplies, spreading fresh hay thick on the ground and covering it with every blanket he could find. "I need to check on the mare," he said. "Then I will be right back. I promise I am not leaving you." Theresa nodded, already lowering herself onto the makeshift bed with trembling arms. Ethan ran back to where the pregnant mare stood, sides heaving, and his practiced eye told him what he feared. The animal was in early labor too, probably brought on by stress and exertion. He got her into an empty stall, gave her water and a bit of grain, then returned to Theresa. She had managed to remove her soaked outer dress and lay in just her undergarments and a thin chemise, modesty abandoned in the face of necessity. Her hands gripped the blanket beneath her, and when another contraction hit, Ethan saw the way her whole body arched with it. He had filled a bucket with clean water from the rain barrel just inside the barn door, and now used it to wash his hands thoroughly, remembering what the doctor had said about cleanliness. "How long have you been having pains?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Since morning," she said when she could speak again. "Maybe longer. I thought they were just false labor at first, but then the wagon wheel broke and the storm came and everything happened so fast." Her voice broke on the last word, and tears mixed with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. "You are safe now," Ethan said, and he meant it with everything in him. "I am going to help you through this. How far along are you?" "9 months, maybe a little more. I lost track of time on the road." He wanted to ask her story, how she had ended up alone and pregnant in a broken wagon in the middle of Wyoming territory, but those questions could wait. Right now, all that mattered was getting her and her baby through the next few hours alive. Another contraction came, stronger than the last, and Theresa grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "I am scared," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said, not letting go. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time, and you are stronger than you think. I can see it in you." She managed a weak smile at that, and something passed between them in that moment. A connection forged in crisis that felt strangely intimate, despite them being complete strangers an hour ago. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the barn's frame, but inside this cocoon of hay and lamplight, time seemed to slow and narrow to just the two of them, and the life she was bringing into the world. The labor progressed quickly after that, faster than Ethan had expected. Theresa's contractions came closer and closer together, until she barely had time to breathe between them. He supported her through each one, letting her squeeze his hands until his fingers went numb, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth, murmuring encouragement that felt inadequate but seemed to help. In between, during the brief moments of respite, she told him fragments of her story in gasping sentences. She had been married to a gambler named Theresa Vance, who won her father's debt in a card game and took her as payment. He had gotten her pregnant, then lost everything they owned in another game 6 months later, before drinking himself to death in a saloon fight in Cheyenne. She had tried to make her way to a sister in Utah, but her money ran out outside of Anston, and her horse died 3 days ago. She had been surviving on what little she could forage, sleeping in the broken wagon, praying someone would come along before the baby arrived. Ethan listened to all of this with growing anger at a world that could be so cruel to someone so young, but he kept his voice gentle and his hands steady. When she finally began to push, he was there, coaching her through it with an assurance he did not entirely feel. The mare in the nearby stall was making her own laboring noises, low nickering sounds that somehow seemed to comfort Theresa rather than distress her. "We are both bringing new life into this world tonight," she panted between pushes. "That has to mean something good, does it not?" "It means everything is going to be all right," Ethan said firmly, and he willed it to be true. The baby came just after midnight, sliding into Ethan's waiting hands with a final push and a cry from Theresa that was equal parts pain and triumph. It was a boy, small but breathing, his lungs strong enough to fill the barn with indignant wails. Ethan cleaned him quickly with warm water and wrapped him in the cleanest cloth he had, then placed him in Theresa's arms. The look on her face in that moment was something Ethan knew he would remember for the rest of his life, a mixture of exhaustion and wonder and fierce protective love that transformed her entirely. "He is beautiful," she whispered, touching the baby's tiny fingers with trembling hands. "He is perfect," Ethan agreed, and he found his own voice rough with emotion he had not expected to feel. He tended to the afterbirth and made sure Theresa was not bleeding too heavily, then covered them both with more blankets and brought water and some bread he had in his saddlebag. Only then did he turn his attention to the mare, who was further along in her own labor now. Theresa watched from her nest of blankets, nursing her newborn son as Ethan worked with the horse. The foaling was uncomplicated, a textbook birth that resulted in a long-legged filly who stood on shaking legs within 20 minutes of arriving. "Two futures," Theresa said softly, looking from her son to the foal. "You delivered two futures tonight, Ethan Porter." He met her eyes across the barn, and something shifted in his chest, a feeling he had no name for yet, but that felt significant nonetheless. "I guess I did," he said. The storm blew itself out before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of sage and wet earth. Ethan had stayed awake all night, checking on Theresa and the baby, making sure the mare and foal were settled, keeping the small fire he had lit in a metal bucket burning for warmth. As gray light began to filter through the barn walls, he finally allowed himself to feel the bone-deep exhaustion that came after such a night. Theresa was sleeping, the baby tucked against her chest, both of them breathing in the deep rhythm of the truly spent. Ethan watched them for a long moment, this woman and child who had come into his life during a storm, and he knew with absolute certainty that he could not let them leave. Not today. Not until they were strong and healthy and ready, and maybe, if he was honest with himself, not ever. That thought should have frightened him. 24 hours ago, he had been a solitary rancher, content with his animals and his land and his simple life. Now he was looking at a woman he barely knew and her newborn son and feeling something that resembled hope, the kind he had not let himself feel since his mother died and left him truly alone in the world. It was too fast, too sudden, too much, and yet it felt more right than anything had in years. When Theresa woke a few hours later, sunlight was streaming through the barn door and Ethan had made coffee over a small camp stove he kept for branding season. He brought her a cup, strong and black, and she accepted it gratefully. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Sore? Tired?" "Happy," she said, looking down at her sleeping son. "I have not felt happy in a very long time." "What are you going to name him?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Samuel, it was my grandfather's name. He was the only man who was ever kind to me before last night." The implication in her words made Ethan's chest tighten. "You and Samuel are welcome to stay here as long as you need," he said carefully. "I've got a house, not fancy but solid, with a spare room you could use. You should not be traveling for a while anyway, not until you are both stronger." Theresa looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know anything about me." "I know enough," Ethan said. "I know you survived something that would have broken most people. I know you kept yourself and your baby alive against all odds. I know you have got courage and strength, and that is more than enough for me." She set down her coffee cup, her hand shaking slightly. "I have got nothing to offer you, Ethan. No money, no family, no prospects. I am just a widow with a bastard child and a past full of bad choices I did not get to make. I am not asking for anything," he said firmly. "I am just offering shelter and help, nothing more. And for what it is worth, none of what happened to you sounds like your fault." Theresa looked away, blinking rapidly, and Ethan gave her privacy to collect herself. He stood and walked to the stall where the mare was nursing her filly, giving Theresa time to think. The foal was already stronger, exploring her stall on increasingly steady legs, and the mare looked content despite her ordeal. He had always believed that animals knew things humans forgot, fundamental truths about survival and family and belonging. "All right," Theresa said from behind him, her voice small but determined. "Just for a little while until I can figure out what to do next, but I will work for my keep. I can cook and clean and help with the animals. I will not be a burden." Ethan turned and smiled at her, the first real smile he had given anyone in months. "You could never be a burden," he said, and he meant it. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed that felt surprisingly natural. Ethan moved Theresa and Samuel into the spare bedroom in his house, a simple space with a bed and a dresser and a window that looked out over the prairie. He had built the house himself 3 years ago, 2 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft upstairs that he used, with a kitchen area and a stone fireplace that kept everything warm. It was modest by any standard, but it was clean and sturdy and safe. Theresa recovered her strength quickly, the resilience he had seen in her proving out in how rapidly she bounced back from childbirth. Within a week, she was up and moving around, insisting on helping despite his protests. She was a good cook, better than him by far, and soon the house smelled of fresh bread and stew instead of the bachelor fare of beans and jerky he had been surviving on. She cleaned without being asked, organized his chaotic storage, and even mended his clothes with neat, careful stitches. Samuel thrived, growing visibly stronger each day, his cries healthy and demanding. Ethan found himself fascinated by the baby in ways he had not anticipated. He would watch Theresa nursing him, rocking him, singing to him in a soft voice, and feel something shift and settle in his heart. This was what a home was supposed to feel like, he realized. This warmth and purpose and sense of belonging. The mare and her filly became Theresa's special project. She had grown up around horses, she told him, before her father's gambling debts destroyed their farm, and she had a natural way with them. She named the mare Bella and the foal Star, for the white marking on her forehead, and spent hours in the barn talking to them, brushing them, watching Star grow stronger and more confident. Ethan watched all of this with growing feelings he tried to keep to himself. It was too soon, he told himself. She had just escaped a terrible situation, had just had a baby, was just finding her feet again. The last thing she needed was him complicating things with romantic feelings. So he kept his distance, was respectful and kind, and tried to ignore the way his heart jumped every time she smiled at him. But Theresa was not blind. She saw the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She noticed how gentle he was with Samuel, how he would hold the baby while she cooked dinner or took a bath, how he had carved a small wooden rattle in the evenings and presented it shyly one morning at breakfast. She saw the man he was, steady and honorable and good, and she found herself falling for him despite every instinct that told her to protect her heart. One evening about a month after that storm-tossed night, they were sitting on the porch after dinner while Samuel slept inside. The sun was setting over the prairie in streaks of orange and gold, and the air smelled of summer grass and wildflowers. Theresa was mending one of Ethan's shirts, and he was whittling a piece of wood into a toy horse for Samuel, both of them comfortable in companionable silence. "Can I ask you something?" Theresa said suddenly. "Anything," Ethan replied, not looking up from his carving. "Why did you never marry? A man like you with land and a good heart, you must have had opportunities." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "I guess I was waiting for the right person," he said finally. "My parents had a real love match, the kind you do not see very often. My mother used to say she knew the moment she met my father that he was the one, that sometimes you just know. After they both passed, I could not settle for anything less than that kind of certainty. And you have been alone all this time. Alone, but not lonely mostly. I had my work, my land, my plans. It was enough." He paused, then added quietly, "until it was not." Theresa set down her mending and looked at him directly. "When did it stop being enough?" Ethan met her eyes, and the truth spilled out before he could stop it. "The night I found you in that storm, the moment I saw you holding Samuel for the first time. Every day since then, when I wake up and hear you singing in the kitchen, or watch you with the horses, or sit here with you like this. It stopped being enough because I realized what I had been missing all along." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and hope and fear. Theresa felt her breath catch in her throat, felt tears prick her eyes for reasons that had nothing to do with sadness. "I am damaged goods, Ethan," she whispered. "I come with a child that is not yours, a past that would shame most men, nothing to offer but myself, and that is not much." Ethan set down his carving and turned to face her fully. "You are the strongest person I have ever met. You are a good mother, a hard worker, kind and brave and beautiful. Samuel is a blessing, not a burden, and any man who gets to be part of his life is lucky. As for your past, it is not your fault and it does not define you. You are so much more than what happened to you." "You really believe that?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I know it," he said firmly. "And I know something else too. I am falling in love with you, Theresa Vance. I think I started falling that first night, and I have not stopped since. I know it is fast and maybe crazy and you might not feel the same way, but I could not keep it to myself anymore." Theresa felt something break open inside her, all the walls she had built around her heart crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. "I feel the same way," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I tried not to because it is too soon and too much, and I am terrified of getting hurt again, but I cannot help it. You make me feel safe and valued and like maybe I deserve good things after all. I love you, Ethan Porter, and that scares me to death." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "We will take it slow," he promised. "No rushing, no pressure. We will figure this out together one day at a time. Does that sound all right?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. And then he was pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. She pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry, releasing months of fear and pain and loneliness, and he held her through it all, solid and steady and real. When she finally pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands and looked at her like she was something precious. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made her love him even more. "Yes," she breathed, and when his lips met hers it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. They courted properly after that, despite living under the same roof. Ethan was unfailingly respectful, never pushing for more than Theresa was ready to give, always checking in and making sure she felt comfortable. They talked for hours, sharing their pasts and their dreams and their fears. He told her about his parents, about the childhood spent learning to work the land, about his hopes of building something lasting on this piece of Wyoming territory. She told him about her mother who died when she was young, about the father who became a different person after that loss, about the marriage she was forced into, and the hell it became. Ethan listened to all of it with growing fury at the men who had hurt her, but he never let that anger touch her. Instead, he showed her through action and word what a good man looked like, what real love felt like, and slowly Theresa began to believe she might deserve it after all. Samuel grew and changed, going from a tiny newborn to a baby who smiled and cooed and reached for things with chubby hands. Ethan loved him as his own, never making a distinction between blood and choice. He walked the floor with Samuel at night when the baby was teething, sang ridiculous songs to make him laugh, and talked about the future as if it was a given that they would all be together. The foal star grew too, becoming a beautiful young horse with her mother's gentle temperament and a speed that promised great things. Ethan started training her gently, and Theresa helped, the two of them working together in easy partnership. The ranch prospered that summer, the cattle healthy, the hay harvest good, everything falling into place in a way that felt almost magical. As fall approached and the air turned crisp, Ethan knew it was time to make his intentions formal. He had been saving money for years, careful and frugal, and now he had a purpose for it. He rode into Evanston one Saturday, leaving Theresa with the excuse of needing supplies, and went to the small jewelry shop on Main Street. The selection was limited, but he found a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light beautifully, and he knew it was right. That evening, after dinner was cleared and Samuel was sleeping, Ethan asked Theresa to walk with him. They strolled out to the spot where he had first brought her on his land, a small rise that looked out over the prairie in all directions. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink and gold. "I brought you here for a reason," Ethan said, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. I come here when I need to think or when I want to remember why I love this life. And lately, every time I am here, I picture sharing it with you." Theresa looked at him with wide eyes, beginning to understand what was happening. Ethan took both her hands in his, holding tight. "I know we have not known each other that long by some standards, but I also know that time does not always matter when something is right. My mother was right about that. When you know, and I know with everything in me that you are the one I have been waiting for. You and Samuel are my family, the family I choose and want and need. So I am asking you, Theresa Vance, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you deserve all the happiness in the world?" He pulled out the ring, and in the fading light it sparkled like a promise. Theresa looked at it, then at him, and tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Porter. I cannot think of anything I want more than to build a life with you, to raise Samuel and maybe more children together, to grow old on this beautiful land with the best man I have ever known. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it was made for her. Then he was kissing her, deeper and more passionate than before, and she was kissing him back, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the stars were beginning to come out overhead. "I love you so much," Theresa said, touching his face with trembling fingers. "I love you too," Ethan replied. "I promise I will spend every day making sure you never doubt that." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Evanston, with half the town in attendance despite them being relative newcomers. The community had taken to Theresa quickly, impressed by her resilience and her kindness, and everyone loved watching Ethan transform from a solitary rancher into a devoted husband and father. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Theresa in a cream-colored dress that one of the town ladies helped her sew. Ethan in his Sunday best with his hair slicked back and his boots polished. Samuel attended his mother's wedding in a tiny suit that Ethan had commissioned specially. And when the baby laughed during the vows, the whole church smiled. The preacher, a kind older man named Reverend Matthews, spoke about second chances and the power of love to heal old wounds, and there was not a dry eye in the house. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by what felt like the entire female population of Evanston. There was dancing and music and toasts to the happy couple, and as Ethan twirled Theresa around under the stars, he felt like the luckiest man alive. That night, alone together for the first time as husband and wife while Samuel slept in his cradle next to their bed, Ethan and Theresa consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Ethan was patient and gentle, always checking that she was all right, and Theresa found healing in his touch, in the way he worshipped her body and made her feel cherished rather than used. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, and Theresa felt truly safe for the first time in her life. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" Ethan asked, running his fingers through her hair. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me." "You saved yourself," Ethan said firmly. "You survived and you kept Samuel safe and you found the strength to trust again. I just got lucky enough to be there when you needed someone." "We both got lucky," Theresa said, tilting her head up to kiss him. "That storm brought us together for a reason." "Two futures," Ethan said, remembering her words from that first night, "and now one life together." The first year of their marriage was full of joy and challenges and growth. The ranch continued to prosper, and Ethan began to expand, buying more cattle and even hiring a young ranch hand named Billy to help with the work. Theresa transformed the house into a real home, adding curtains and rugs and small touches that made everything warm and welcoming. Samuel grew into a bright, happy toddler who loved the animals and followed Ethan around like a shadow. In the spring, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. The news filled them both with excitement and a little fear, remembering the circumstances of Samuel's birth, but this pregnancy was different. Theresa was healthy and well-fed, with a doctor in town and a husband who fussed over her constantly. She bloomed with it, more beautiful than ever, and Ethan could not keep his hands off her growing belly. "What do you think this one will be?" he asked one night, his hands spread across her stomach. "I do not know," Theresa said, smiling, "but healthy is all that matters to me." "Healthy and loved," Ethan agreed. "This baby is going to have everything Samuel has, you know that, right? I do not make a distinction between them in my heart." "I know," Theresa said, and she did. Ethan had proven it 1,000 times over, the way he introduced Samuel as his son without hesitation, the way he was already planning for Samuel's future education and inheritance, the way he loved him unconditionally. "You are the father Samuel was meant to have, the one he deserves. Blood does not make a family. Love does." The second baby, a girl they named Emma Rose Porter, was born in December on a snowy night with the doctor in attendance and Ethan by Theresa's side the whole time. The labor was shorter and easier than Samuel's had been, and when Emma arrived with a lusty cry and a head full of dark hair, Theresa felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Ethan held his daughter with tears streaming down his face, this tiny person who was half him and half the woman he loved, and he understood finally what his parents must have felt. "She is perfect," he said in wonder. "She is ours," Theresa replied, and the word ours carried so much weight and meaning. Samuel, now almost 2 years old, was fascinated by his new sister. He would stand by her cradle and babble to her, bringing her his favorite toys, trying to help in his clumsy toddler way. Ethan and Theresa watched their son become a big brother with pride and amusement, marveling at how their little family had grown. Star the filly, now a beautiful young mare, had her first foal that spring, fathered by Ethan's best stallion. The circle of life continued, everything growing and expanding and thriving. The ranch was doing better than Ethan had ever dreamed, his hard work and smart decisions paying off in ways that allowed him to provide well for his family. He bought more land, built a bigger barn, started planning for a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. Over the years that followed, Theresa and Ethan built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They had 3 more children, a boy named Jacob, then twin girls named Margaret and Louisa. Their house expanded to accommodate the growing family, rooms added on and floors strengthened, and everything bursting with noise and life and love. Samuel grew into a fine young man, strong and kind like his stepfather, with a natural gift for working with horses that made him invaluable on the ranch. He knew the truth of his birth, but it never mattered to him. Ethan was his father in every way that counted, and the love between them was as real and solid as blood. Emma Rose became the beauty of the family, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's ready smile, sharp as a tack and determined to get an education, despite it being unusual for girls at the time. Ethan supported her fully, already planning to send her to a teacher's college when she was old enough. Jacob was the quiet one, thoughtful and serious, who loved to read and learn and ask endless questions about how things worked. The twins were wild and joyful, a matched set of energy and mischief that kept everyone on their toes. Theresa watched her children grow with a gratitude that never dimmed. Some nights she would lie in bed next to Ethan, listening to the sounds of their full house, and remember that desperate woman in the storm who thought her life was over. She had been so wrong. Her life had been just beginning, the hard parts making way for something beautiful and lasting. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan would ask, pulling her close. "How lucky I am," she would always reply. "How grateful I am that you found me that night." "I think about that too," Ethan would say. "How different my life would be if I had gone home a different way, or if the storm had come an hour later, or if I had not seen you in that lightning flash. All the little moments that had to line up perfectly to bring us together." "Fate," Theresa would say firmly. "It was fate." As the children grew and the ranch prospered, Ethan and Theresa became pillars of the Avanston community. They helped neighbors in need, donated to the church, hosted gatherings that became legendary for Theresa's cooking and Ethan's generosity. Their love story became a local legend of sorts, the cowboy who rescued a pregnant woman in a storm and ended up finding his soulmate. They grew older together gracefully, their love deepening rather than fading with time. The passion of youth settled into something even better, a partnership based on trust and respect and genuine friendship as much as romance. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed goodbye every morning, still looked at each other across a crowded room and smiled secret smiles that spoke of shared history and private joy. When Samuel turned 21, Ethan officially signed over a portion of the ranch to him, making him a full partner in the operation. Samuel had earned it through years of hard work and dedication, and Ethan trusted him completely. They ran the ranch together, father and son in spirit if not in blood, building something that would last for generations. Emma Rose did go to teacher's college, and came back to Evanston to teach at the local school, marrying a good man named Thomas, who was a deputy sheriff, and treating her with the respect and love she deserved. Jacob went east to study engineering, his curious mind finding satisfaction in designing bridges and buildings, but he always came home for Christmas and summer, his roots too deep in Wyoming to ever truly leave. The twins married brothers, much to everyone's amusement, in a double wedding that was the social event of the year. They settled on neighboring ranches, raising their own families while staying close to the parents who had given them such a strong foundation. Through it all, through the weddings and births and occasional sorrows that came with living a full life, Ethan and Theresa remained each other's constants. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about money or the children or ranch decisions, but they always worked through them with communication and compromise. Their respect for each other never wavered, and their love only grew stronger. One evening, 30 years after that fateful storm, Ethan and Theresa sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done thousands of times before. Their hair was gray now, their hands marked with age spots and work-roughened skin, but they still held hands like newlyweds. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and well-maintained, the next generation already taking over the daily operations. "Did you ever imagine this?" Theresa asked, gesturing to encompass everything, the land, the house, the family they had built. "When you found me that night, did you have any idea it would lead to all of this?" Ethan thought about it seriously, as he always did when she asked important questions. "I do not know that I imagined the details," he said slowly. "But I think part of me recognized something that night, recognized you, recognized the potential for something extraordinary. It was like my mother said, 'When you know, you know.'" "I was so broken then," Theresa said softly, "so sure I would never be happy or safe or loved." "You proved me wrong about everything. You healed yourself," Ethan corrected gently, as he had been doing for 30 years. "I just provided a safe place for that healing to happen. The strength was always yours." "We healed each other," Theresa insisted, turning to face him. "I gave you a family and a purpose beyond just work. You gave me safety and love and a second chance. We saved each other, and we built something beautiful together." Ethan could not argue with that. He leaned over and kissed her, soft and sweet, and even after 3 decades, the feeling of her lips on his still made his heart race. "I love you, Theresa Porter," he said against her mouth. "I will love you until the day I die, and probably long after that." "I love you too," she replied, her eyes shining with happy tears. "Thank you for being the man who stopped in that storm. Thank you for delivering 2 futures and giving me a lifetime of happiness." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in those familiar shades of orange and gold. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. The ranch would continue through their children and grandchildren. The land would endure, and their love story would be passed down through generations. A reminder that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family gathering for Sunday dinner. Grandchildren laughing and running, adult children setting the table and catching up with each other. The noise and chaos of a family that was deeply rooted in love. It was exactly what Ethan had dreamed of all those years ago when he was a solitary rancher, and it was more than Theresa had ever dared to hope for when she was a desperate woman in a broken wagon. "Should we go in?" Theresa asked, though neither of them moved. "In a minute," Ethan said, tightening his hold on her hand. "I just want to sit here with you a little longer, just the 2 of us, and remember how it all started." So they sat together as the stars began to emerge, The first stars they had seen together that night 30 years ago now joined by millions more, constant and eternal. Two people who had become one through choice and commitment, and a love that had weathered every storm. Two futures that had become one beautiful life, full of purpose and joy, and the kind of lasting happiness that only comes from choosing to love someone every single day, no matter what. When they finally stood and walked into the house hand in hand, they were greeted with hugs and kisses and the warmth of family. Dinner was served, stories were told, grandchildren climbed on laps and begged for treats, and through it all Ethan and Theresa sat side by side, anchoring it all, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, they climbed the stairs to their bedroom slowly, their bodies not as spry as they once were, but still strong, still capable. They got ready for bed in the familiar rhythm of 3 decades, each knowing the other's routines by heart, and when they finally slid under the covers, they came together naturally, Theresa's head on Ethan's chest, his arm around her shoulders. "You ever think about that mare and her foal?" Theresa asked sleepily. "About how we were all struggling that night, all bringing new life into the world." "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "Bella lived a good long life, remember? 25 years before she passed peacefully in her sleep. And Star gave us 3 more generations of fine horses before she went too. Their legacy is still in every foal born on this ranch. Just like Samuel's children and Emma's and all the rest carry our legacy forward," Theresa mused. "We delivered 2 futures that night, but really we delivered so many more. Everyone who has come from our family, everyone who has been touched by our love, it all stems back to that storm and your decision to stop and help." "Best decision I ever made," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "Finding you, loving you, building this life with you. None of it was planned, but all of it was perfect." "Not perfect," Theresa corrected with a small laugh. "We have had our share of struggles and hard times, but real, honest, full of love even in the difficult moments." "That is better than perfect." "You are right," Ethan agreed. "As you usually are." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they would wake up together in the morning as they had every morning for 30 years. The ranch was quiet around them, the animals settled in the barn, the land resting under a blanket of stars, everything exactly as it should be. Years continued to pass, and Ethan and Theresa grew older still, their children becoming grandparents themselves, their great-grandchildren running through the ranch house that had been expanded so many times it barely resembled the original 2-room structure. They slowed down, letting the younger generation take over more and more of the physical work, but they remained vital and engaged, offering wisdom and guidance when asked and love always. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came from all over Wyoming and beyond, filling the ranch to bursting with noise and life and laughter. There was a formal dinner, dancing, toasts that went on for hours, everyone wanting to honor the couple whose love had created this remarkable family tree. Samuel, now in his early 40s and looking so much like Ethan that it made Theresa's heart ache with love, stood to give a toast. His own children sat around him, and his wife of 15 years smiled encouragement. "I want to talk about my father," Samuel began, and the room quieted to listen. "I know that Ethan Porter is not my father by blood. Everyone in this room knows the story of how I was born in a barn during a storm, how my mother was alone and desperate, and how Ethan saved us both. But I want you all to know something. Blood has never mattered to me because Ethan Porter has been my father in every way that counts from the moment he laid eyes on me. He taught me how to ride, how to work the land, how to be a man of honor and integrity. He loved me without reservation or condition, and he gave me the greatest gift any father can give his son. He showed me what real love looks like through how he treats my mother, and he set an example I have tried to follow in my own marriage. Samuel's voice broke with emotion, and he paused to collect himself before continuing. So I want to raise a glass to Ethan and Theresa Porter, my parents, the foundation of this family and the reason we are all here. Thank you for showing us that love can heal any wound, that family is about choice as much as blood, and that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. We love you both more than words can say. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Ethan pulled Theresa close, both of them crying openly at their son's words. Emma Rose stood next, then Jacob, then the twins, each sharing their own memories and gratitude, painting a picture of parents who had loved generously and guided wisely, and created a family culture based on acceptance and support. When it was finally Ethan's turn to speak, he stood slowly, his age showing in the stiffness of his joints but his voice still strong and clear. He looked around the room at the sea of faces, all connected to him through the choice he made 40 years ago to stop in a storm and help a woman in need. I am not a man of fancy words, he began, so I will keep this simple. 40 years ago, I was a lonely rancher with a quiet life and no real purpose beyond surviving. Then a storm came and I found Theresa and Samuel, and everything changed. Theresa, you have made every single day of the last 40 years worth living. You have given me a family, a purpose, a love that has sustained me through everything. You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I fall in love with you more deeply every single day. He turned to face her directly, taking her hands in his. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago, for trusting me, for building this life with me. Thank you for every child we raised together, for every moment of joy and even the sorrows we weathered side by side. You are my heart, my home, my everything, and I would live that night in the storm 1,000 times over if it meant ending up here with you. There was not a dry eye in the room as Ethan pulled Theresa to her feet and kissed her, a kiss that held 40 years of love and passion and partnership. The family erupted in applause again, and then everyone was on their feet, hugging and crying and celebrating the kind of love that most people only dream about. The party continued long into the night, with music and dancing and stories told and retold until they became the mythology of the family. Children fell asleep in piles on couches and floors. Adults drank and laughed and remembered. And through it all, Ethan and Theresa sat in the middle of it like the sun at the center of the solar system, everything revolving around the gravity of their love. As they lay in bed that night, exhausted but happy, Theresa turned to Ethan with a question she had never asked before. Do you have any regrets? Anything you wish you had done differently? Ethan thought about it seriously, as was his way, before answering. No, he said finally. Not a single one. Every choice I made led me here, to you, to this family, to this life. How could I regret any of it? Not even the hard times, Theresa pressed. The year the drought nearly broke us, when Jacob was so sick we thought we might lose him. All the struggles and fears and difficult moments. Especially not those, Ethan said firmly, because those moments taught us how strong we are together. They tested us and we passed every time. Our love was forged in a storm, Theresa, and it has weathered every storm since. That is not something to regret. That is something to celebrate. Theresa smiled and kissed him softly. I love you so much, Ethan Porter. Thank you for 40 years of happiness. "Thank you for saying yes," Ethan replied, "and for all the years to come." They made love that night, slow and tender, their bodies knowing each other so intimately that words were unnecessary. Afterwards, they held each other close, and Theresa felt a contentment so deep it was almost spiritual. This was what she had been meant for all along, she realized. This man, this family, this life. Everything that came before, all the pain and fear and struggle, had been necessary to bring her here. She would not change any of it. 5 more years passed in relative peace and happiness. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, with help from his sons and Ethan's other grandchildren. Ethan and Theresa spent their days in gentle retirement, tending a garden, visiting with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, taking slow walks around the property they loved. Then, one morning in early summer when the wildflowers were in full bloom, Ethan woke with a strange pain in his chest. He tried to hide it from Theresa, not wanting to worry her, but she knew him too well after 45 years. She saw the pallor in his face, the way he pressed his hand to his sternum, and she knew immediately that something was seriously wrong. The doctor was called, came quickly, and delivered the news they both feared. Ethan's heart was failing, had probably been struggling for a while, though he had never mentioned any symptoms. There was not much that could be done, the doctor said gently. Ethan was 71 years old and had lived a hard-working life. His body was simply wearing out. Theresa felt the floor drop out from under her at those words, felt her own heart crack at the thought of losing him. But she did not fall apart, not then. She thanked the doctor, saw him out, and then returned to Ethan's side where he sat in the chair by the window, looking out over the land he loved. "I am sorry," he said when she came in, and his voice was heavy with sorrow. "I know this is not what you wanted to hear." "How long have you known something was wrong?" she asked, sitting down beside him and taking his hand. "A few months," he admitted. "I did not want to worry you, and I kept thinking it would get better on its own." "You stubborn man," she said, but there was no anger in her voice, only love and sadness. "We could have had more time to prepare, to make plans. I do not want to spend whatever time I have left preparing for the end," Ethan said, turning to look at her. "I want to spend it living, loving you, seeing our family, enjoying every moment I can. Please do not be angry with me for that." Theresa felt tears stream down her face, but she nodded. "I am not angry," she said. "I am heartbroken, but I am not angry, and you are right. We will make the most of whatever time we have left." They told the family together, gathering everyone at the ranch for a somber meeting that left everyone in tears. But Ethan, ever the leader, refused to let it become a wake before he was even gone. He insisted on normalcy, on continuing with their lives as much as possible, on focusing on joy rather than sorrow. The next few months were bittersweet. Ethan's condition declined slowly but steadily, his energy fading, his pain increasing despite the laudanum the doctor prescribed. But his spirit remained strong, and his love for Theresa never wavered. They spent long hours talking, reminiscing about their years together, making sure everything was settled for when he was gone. "Promise me you will be all right," Ethan said one night as they lay in bed, his breathing labored but his mind clear. "I promise I will survive," Theresa said carefully, "but I will never be all right without you. You are half of my soul, Ethan. When you go, that part goes with you." "No," he said firmly, mustering strength from somewhere deep inside. "You keep all of yourself, Theresa. You stay strong for our children and grandchildren. You keep this family together the way you have always done. You live a full life even after I am gone, because that is the only way any of this means anything. Promise me." "I promise," she said through her tears, and she meant it even though the thought of life without him felt impossible. Ethan Porter died on a crisp October morning with the aspens turning gold outside his window and his wife holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," whispered to Theresa with his final breath, and she whispered them back as his eyes closed for the last time. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming. Ethan had touched so many lives through his kindness and generosity, and people came from miles away to pay their respects. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot he had picked out years ago, with a simple headstone that read, "Ethan Porter, beloved husband, father, and friend." Theresa thought she might die from the grief in those first few weeks. The house felt empty despite being full of family who stayed to support her. The bed felt too big, the mornings too quiet, the world too gray and meaningless without Ethan in it. But she had promised him she would survive, would live, and she was determined to keep that promise. Slowly, painfully, she found her way back to a kind of equilibrium. She would never be the same without Ethan, but she could still find moments of joy in her grandchildren's laughter, in the beauty of the land, in the memories of 45 years of love. Samuel and Emma rose, and all the others rallied around her, making sure she was never alone for long, including her in every aspect of family life. She lived for another 12 years after Ethan died, long enough to see great-great-grandchildren born, long enough to celebrate Samuel's silver wedding anniversary, long enough to feel satisfied that the legacy she and Ethan built would continue long after she was gone. She never remarried, never even considered it. There had only ever been one great love in her life, and he was waiting for her. When Theresa Porter died at the age of 83, peacefully in her sleep, the family mourned, but they also celebrated. She had lived a full, rich life, had overcome tremendous hardship to find lasting happiness, and had raised a family that would carry her values forward for generations. She was buried next to Ethan on that hill overlooking the ranch, and a new stone was placed between them that read, "Together Forever." The ranch continued to thrive, passing down through Samuel and then his children, each generation adding their own touches while maintaining the core values Ethan and Theresa had established. The story of how it all began, how a cowboy found a pregnant mare and a homeless woman in a storm and delivered two futures, became family legend, told and retold until every detail was worn smooth with repetition. But the truth at the heart of it never changed. Two people, brought together by chance and circumstance, chose love over fear, chose each other over loneliness, and built something beautiful that lasted beyond their lifetimes. They proved that family is not just about blood but about choice, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. On the ranch that still bears the Porter name, horses descended from Bella and Star still graze in the pastures. The barn where Samuel was born has been rebuilt twice, but stands on the same foundation. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original 2 rooms that Ethan built still form its heart. And on that hill where Ethan and Theresa rest together, wildflowers bloom every spring, a natural memorial to a love that changed everything. Their great-great-grandchildren ride across the same land. Ethan once worked alone, never knowing loneliness because they are surrounded by family. They hear stories of their legendary ancestors and understand that they are the living proof of what true love can create. They carry forward the values of hard work, integrity, and unconditional love that were modeled so perfectly by 2 people who met in the worst of circumstances and chose to make the best of them. And sometimes, on stormy nights when the lightning splits the Wyoming sky and the thunder shakes the earth, the current generation of Porters will stand at their windows and think about that long-ago storm that brought their family into being. They will think about the courage it took for Theresa to survive, the compassion it took for Ethan to stop and help, and the love it took for both of them to build a life together. They will feel grateful for every choice their ancestors made, every hardship they overcame, every moment of joy they shared, because that is what legacy really means. Not just land or money or possessions passed down through generations, but values and love, and the understanding that we are all connected across time by the choices we make and the love we give. Ethan and Theresa Porter understood that in their bones, lived it every day of their 45 years together, and created something that will endure as long as there are people to remember their story and honor the love that made it all possible. The ranch stands as testament to their love, but the real monument is in the hearts of every person who carries their blood or their name or simply their influence. In every act of kindness, every choice to love instead of fear, every moment when someone stops to help another person in need, Ethan and Theresa live on. They delivered 2 futures on that stormy night so long ago, but they actually delivered countless futures, echoing forward through time in ways they could never have imagined. And that, ultimately, is what makes their story worth telling. Not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real and hard-won and full of the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. They were just 2 ordinary people faced with extraordinary circumstances, who chose each other and chose love and built something extraordinary as a result. Their story reminds us that we all have that same potential, that same choice available to us every single day to love generously, to help without expecting return, to build rather than destroy, to choose family however we define it, to weather storms together rather than alone, to believe in second chances and fresh starts, and the power of compassion to heal old wounds. These are the lessons Ethan and Theresa Porter taught through how they lived, and these lessons continue to resonate because they are timeless and universal and desperately needed in every generation. The sun sets over the Porter Ranch, just as it did on that first night when Ethan brought Theresa and Samuel home. The same stars emerge in the same patterns. The same wind blows across the same prairie grass. But everything is different because 2 people loved each other well and raised a family that understood what really matters. The land will endure, the family will continue, and the love story that started it all will be told and retold as long as there are Porters to tell it. And somewhere, beyond the veil between this world and the next, Ethan and Theresa dance together under eternal stars, finally reunited after 12 years apart, their love undiminished by death or time. They watch over the ranch and the family they created, and they smile with satisfaction at the good work their hands began all those years ago in a barn during a storm. 2 futures delivered, countless more created, and a love story for the ages, written not in words but in the lives of everyone they touched. That is the legacy of Ethan and Theresa Porter, and it is a legacy that will never fade.